Okay, for this episode, we're going to give you an overview of a lot of the subjects we've already talked about related to anchoring. So let's get right into it. First off, selecting the right spot. These are the factors that you're going to have to consider. Protection from the wind, swell, and waves. You also want to stay clear of traffic lanes and other anchored vessels. You want to make sure that you're anchoring in adequate depth, and you want to factor in your swing radius in all wind and tide conditions. You want to avoid anchoring on hazards like rocks, reefs, cables. Those are generally highlighted on navigation charts. And you also want to be aware of compliances with local restrictions. Some areas are prohibited from anchoring. Now, the wind and tides, right? Expect the wind direction and speed to change, especially in tight bays or near cliffs where the wind can kind of swirl around and it can be very inconsistent. There's a lot of wind prediction apps that are out there, right? There's an app called Windy, Savvy Navi, which is a navigation app. They also have wind now included in it. But just like all things, right? It's the weatherman. You never can necessarily believe it. And I've been out and it said that it was going to be 20 knots and it was only 3. So, use it wisely, and it's not always correct. You certainly do want to monitor the tides carefully. You can do a Google search and find kind of the tides in an area. Some places, like for instance in New England, they have tide charts where it's like a booklet you can buy and basically shows what the tide is, where the current is, and just be aware of that. Now, setting the anchor, right? The next part, make sure that everyone is on the same page. Make sure that your crew knows where you're anchoring, how much they're going to let out of the chain. Have a discussion to make sure that everyone's on the same page with the hand signals for communication, because for whatever reason, when things are going down, especially with the anchor, communicating from the helm to the bow can turn into a yelling match. So use hand signals. So you're going to motor into the wind or the current, whatever's stronger, whatever is having the most impact on the boat. You want to come to a full stop so you don't have any forward momentum. You want to deploy the anchor very slowly, making sure that the anchor doesn't come down and smash into the gel coat of the boat. As the anchor nears the bottom, the boat can drift slightly back, or you can put it into reverse. Basically you want to have it laid out in a straight line. Let out the appropriate amount of chain or rope based on the depth. So once you've deployed the amount that you want and the boat seems to be kind of relatively stable, you can put reverse throttle at 1500 RPMs for a few minutes, and that will just guarantee that the anchor is set. Some people live in areas where you can actually swim down and visually confirm that the anchor is set, but that's just not the case everywhere. If you got an all chain setup, make sure that you have a snubber. I have a snubber on my chain setup. Basically, when I deploy my all chain, I have a snubber on both sides, right? So on both sides of the boat, it basically absorbs that shock load. And I use a Dyneema, very strong piece of synthetic line. Does a good job. It's got a ton of strength behind it, so it's not like it's going to break. Probably around the same strength as the anchor chain itself. Another thing to consider is the swing radius, right? So your boat will always position itself downwind from the anchor. Usually it's the wind that has the most force on a boat. So as the wind changes, your boat will swing within its radius, right? So some key considerations when, you're factoring in swing. You don't want to make contact with other boats, shore, or hazards, right? You want to avoid anchoring in mooring fields or too close to boats. Monitoring the anchor, right? You can do some manual checks, which is sight bearings on fixed objects on the shore, whether that be landmarks or at night lights, so that you know that you're in the same position and you remain steady there. There's some electronic tools out there. There's GPS tracking. There's some apps out there. So, at night, just download one of these apps and you can set a radius. They're not always perfect, and the GPS can kind of bounce around a little bit. There was one place that I anchored and I was using, this was a few years back, I was using a phone app, and about every 30 minutes, the phone app would just start losing its mind, start blasting like sounds at me, scared the crap out of me. So I think some of the technology has got a little bit better, but still don't always rely on electronics. Always keep your senses, use manual checks. Now, okay, lights at anchor. So international rules require that you have a white all-around light at the top of the mast or the highest point of the boat. Do not have your running lights on, the reds and greens, because that indicates that the boat is moving. So you don't want to do that. So that is kind of the overview of anchoring. And if you guys want more insights into anchoring, some pro tips, all of that, check out the NauticEd anchoring course that is in the notes below.